All right. Good morning, coffee or tea sippers. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to another soul stirring episode of Bible with a Twist. I am your host, Dr. Diane Bailey, and this is your reminder that no matter how your week starts, don't worry, God's got your Monday. Today's episode is titled From the Pit to Purpose. We're diving into the life of Joseph, the dreamer, who found himself betrayed, broken, and thrown into a pit. But don't turn off your hope yet. Don't give up yet. Don't feel like that's the end yet, because that pit wasn't the end. It was actually a process. So whether you're tuning in from your kitchen table, your car ride, or that office cubicle that feels more like a cave, grab your Bible, refill your cup, and lean in, because what we're learning today is the place that feels like a pit might be God's luncheon pad for your purpose. So let's get ready to spill the tea. All right, we are coming from Genesis, and we're going to actually be jumping around through the book of Genesis. So we're reading from chapter 37 to chapter 50. We're not doing every one of those verses. We're just hitting the main verses that ties into painting this particular picture. Now, the first question that came to my mind was, why did Joseph dream dreams? Because this whole thing of why everything happened to Joseph was because he dreamed dreams. So the question I had is, well, why? Why did he dream dreams? Now, in the Old Testament, Joseph's ability to dream dreams and interpret them was a divine gift that signified God's presence and purpose in his life. But he was not formally called a prophet. Now, in today's time, they are known as prophets. Also, prophets have, in a lot of cases, they have the ability to interpret what is being said, or what is being the vision they are able to interpret. So, but in this case, he was never referred to as a prophet. Now, he wasn't referred to as a prophet in a way like Isaiah, Jeremiah, or Samuel, but he did have that ability. So, what did it mean that Joseph dreamed dreams? What did that mean? Because we know that the whole reasoning for this starting is because of the fact that he had a dream that made it seem like he was going to be in the head of that family, and everyone else was going to be in the background. So what did it mean that Joseph dreamed dreams? Joseph dreams in Genesis 37, where he saw his brother bowing to his request, or his demand, and the sun, the moon, and the stars bowing to him, were prophetic, of course, in nature, revealing God's future plan for his life. These dreams stirred attention in his family, especially among his brothers, who saw them as claims to authority. So his brothers was quite upset when he was telling about these dreams that he was having. Now, he received divine revelation through dreams, and you can locate that in Genesis 37, 5 through 10. He interpreted dreams that was given to others, which was notably, one of the dreams notably mentioned was about Pharaoh dreams about the coming famine that was going to come into the land. And you can find that in Genesis 40 and also Genesis 41. His interpretation came to pass, showing God's hand in his sight. Now, he played a key redemptive role in preserving God's chosen people. And you can find that in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. So not only was he was he having these dreams, but these dreams were also coming to pass. These dreams were also being interpreted of future events that was going to occur. So while Joseph wasn't a prophet in the office or in the title, he did, however, function prophetically, especially as someone through whom God revealed his will and his plan. So let's dig a little bit deeper into that. Now, dreams were often God's way of speaking to the subconscious mind, especially before the full canon or scriptures were written. So, back in biblical time, before the canon of scriptures were written, these dreams were spoken to the subconscious mind of the individual. Now, Joseph's early dreams formed his identity and sense of divine calling, even when everything in his life contradicted them. So nobody liked what he was saying. Nobody liked what was how God was using him. Nobody necessarily liked that, but that was actually forming his identity. His ability to hold on to those dreams and hardships shows deep spiritual resilience, emotional maturity, and trust in God's sovereignty, hallmarks of a spiritually aligned mind. So for him to be able to remember these dreams, for him to be able to replay these dreams, for him to be able to tell in great details these dreams, it shows just how mature emotionally he was and how much he trusts God's sovereignty and how much his mind was spiritually aligned. So let's get down to the part where the dreamer, who is Joseph, was being betrayed. He was to be betrayed. In Genesis 37 and 5, it says, "And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more." So he was doing what a typical brother would do. He had this dream. He wanted to tell somebody. He told his brother, and they took that, their perception of that, or their thoughts of that, or whatever the case may be, and it caused even more friction on their part. So why did his brother hate him the more when he told his dreams? Why did his brother hate him the more when he told his dreams? That's the question that comes to mind. I mean, he's simply just telling you guys a dream that was happening, something that he has experienced while sleeping. So why would that cause them to hate him the more? Well, Joseph's brothers hated him when he told his dreams, and it was a few reasons as to why that was the case. Their hatred was not just about the dreams, but about what the dreams represented. So it had nothing to do with the fact that he was having these dreams. It was about what these dreams represented. It was combined with deep family dysfunction, jealousy, and immaturity. This is the twist part of this biblical story. This is the twist part because there was some deep rooted dysfunction that was going on in Israel family, who was the father of Joseph. It was some deep rooted uh, dysfunction that was going on, and we have that even now. Many a time there's deep rooted issues that's going on in the family, and instead of addressing those issues, we just keep letting those recycle down through the generations, and those issues get worse and worse as it goes along through the generations. And people just don't want to face it, don't want to deal with it. Now this favoritism that Israel had for for Joseph, it actually fueled resentment with Joseph's brother. In Genesis 37 and 3, It says, "Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors." Now Joseph was clearly his father's, Jacob, because Israel and Jacob is the same person, favorite. Now the coat of many colors was not just a gift, it was a symbol of status, like giving a child a robe, a royalty robe, while the others wore everyday clothing. This favoritism created a sibling rivalry that ended up breeding bitterness. And what we have to worry about, what we have to be concerned about, or what we have to keep in mind, that even though you may be closer to one child over the other, if you have multiple children, you may be closer to one child over the other. You the love that you show is to be equal. I can be closer to one child over the other, but the love that I'm to show my children is to be equal. So the way it was being interpreted here was that Jacob was showing more love and favoritism towards Joseph over the other brothers. See, and we those of us who are parents, we can try to dress it up however we want to, but if we have multiple children, there's always going to be one of our children that we're more closer to than the other or others. That's a human nature. That's a human fact. But even with that, the love that is shown is to be equal. You can't pin one against the other. You can't make one feel like they more important than the other. You can't treat one more better than the other. You can't love one more than the others. Your love for them is to be equal. And this is the dysfunction that was happening in Jacob's family. He had multiple sons. In fact, including with Joseph, he had 12 sons. And out of those 12, his love that was shown was more for Joseph than the others. And the reason being, based on Genesis 37:3, was because he was born when Jacob had gotten old. And so, because of that, that caused a sibling rivalry between the other 11 brothers and Joseph. And it wasn't addressed, which is what we see a lot of now. A lot of times when there's a dysfunction going on in the family, it's not necessarily addressed. We just kind of hope that it goes away. We'll put a rug on it and hope that it goes away, or we'll just uh, uh, maybe show more love to the one that we favor and hope that the others just keep doing whatever they doing, because we're not gonna worry about them. We're gonna be concerned about this one here that shows more promise. Again, human nature, when you have multiple children, human nature naturally puts you closer to one over the others. But the love that is to be shown needs to be equal. I wanted to stay on there for a minute because I wanted the people to understand we're using biblical story to show life issues and how to deal with life issues using biblical principles. So I wanted to use that fact because we see a lot of that going on in the world today. And it has really caused deep seated hatred down through the years, down through the generation. It has caused deep seated hatred that gets bigger and bigger as time goes on. Now, Joseph's dream sounded like arrogance. Sounded like arrogance. Not only, if you really stop and think about this story, not only did Joseph's dad, Jacob, loved him or appeared to love him more than he did his other sons. Not only that, but it also come off as maybe Joseph was kind of arrogant about it. Now, I don't think that that was the case, but that's the way it was perceived. So let's look at Genesis 37 and 7. It says, "Behold, your sheaves stood round about and made obsequious to my sheaf." So when Joseph shared his dream, they implied that his brothers would one day bow to him. Now, in a culture of honor and hierarchy, this was seen as insulting and presumptuous. To look like, oh, okay, wait a minute, you are a younger brother, and then you gonna say we gonna bow to you? That come off as a little bit of being arrogant. That's the way it seemed. So though the dreams were prophetic, the way he shared them sounded like he had superiority to his already insecure brothers. They already felt some type of way because it seemed like his father loved him more than them. So to add to that, here he come with his "I'm better than you" attitude. At least that's the way it seemed to them. Let's look at Genesis 37 and 8. "And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words." They recognized that God might be with Joseph in a special way. Rather than celebrate or seek their own purpose, they allowed this envy to harden their hearts. Instead of them saying, "Okay, God, Joseph is learning what his purpose is. Joseph is learning what he he's supposed to be doing. He's learning this. Uh, can you show us what our purpose is?" Because believe it or not, everybody has a purpose, good or bad. Everybody has a purpose. I'm gonna say it one more time. Everybody has a purpose, good or bad. Everybody has a purpose. It's not one person has a purpose and you don't. Everybody has a purpose. So they hated him because the dreams hinted that God had destined Joseph for greatness and they weren't part of it, at least in the way that they wanted to be. Because the way Joseph told it, they was beneath him. They was to bow to him. They was to serve him. So they was a part of the dream, but not in the way that they wanted to be. Now, looking at it from a life standpoint, Joseph's brothers suffered from comparison, identity confusion, and rejection wounds. They suffered from being compared between them and their younger brother. They didn't know what their own purpose was, their own identity was. They didn't know because they never seek to learn their own identity. They just took what God had gave Joseph and they built hatred and resentment and bitterness around that. And that caused those wounds of rejection to be deeper and deeper and deeper. So let's look at the results of that. The results of that became unresolved jealousy that led to hatred. They jealousy of Joseph led to hatred. And that was in Genesis 37 and 8, where it says they hated him yet the more. So they already hated him, but then here this hatred was getting deeper and deeper. Now, rejected sons was another result. Like the others who were not favored by Jacob, often lashed out at one receiving love or favor, in this case, which was Joseph. They tried to find a way to get rid of him. Not only was he their daddy's favorite, they was also Joseph was also in their minds, because this is how the enemy plays with our mind. We take a little bit of hurt, a little bit of resentment, a little bit of jealousy, and the enemy takes it and he builds it up to make it bigger than what it is. Oh, oh, your daddy loved Joseph more than he does. All right, I think it's working. I think we got it back going. Okay, so let's move on. We're almost done here. Now, this was also the divine setup that was going on. This was also the divine setup that was going on. Okay, so the divine setup, you can find that in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. Anytime the enemy is trying to do something bad to us, God is going to always turn it for our good. We can be sure that anytime the enemy meant something bad to us, God is going to always turn it for our good. Now, though the motive of his brothers was evil, though it was presented because of jealousy and envy, God used their actions to position Joseph right where he needed to be in Egypt. Because while he was there as a slave, Joseph began to interpret Pharaoh's dream. He saved many lives during the famine, and he reconciled and rescued his family. So, what they saw as rejection, God actually used as redirection. Now, many times rejection by people can be God's redirection into our purpose. Now, his brothers put him in that pit. His brothers then sold him. Joseph could have taken all of that went on to him and became bitter. But instead of doing that, he chose faith and he chose forgiveness. Now, emotionally being sold by family, wounds will be deepened. But God used that wound to open the door for wisdom and for leadership. Now, while he was in prison, as you thought as if it could get any worse, it did. While he was in prison, he was falsely accused. While he was a slave, he was falsely accused and imprisoned. And you can find that in Genesis 39, 20, and 21. Joseph's story is a powerful example of faithfulness and God's providence, even in the darkest moment. Despite being falsely accused by the Potiphar wife and thrown into prison, Joseph did not lose hope or faith. The verses highlight two critical truths. Injustice can happen to the righteous. Just because you're righteous don't mean that injustice can't happen. Joseph was innocent, but suffered unjustly. Sometimes in life, faithful people face trials not because of their wrongdoing, but because of others' actions or circumstances beyond their control, which is in the case here. The Potiphar wife wanted to sleep with Joseph, and because Joseph refused to, she falsely accused him. God's presence also brings mercy and favor. Even in prison, God was with Joseph. This divine presence gave Joseph strength, favor, and eventually led to his rise from prison to a position of great authority. Now, here's a couple of life applications. When you face wrongful accusation or difficult situation, remember Joseph's example. Trust that God sees your faithfulness and will provide mercy and deliverance in his perfect timing. God's favor can shine through any type of hardship, any type of trials, and turn those trials into stepping stones for a greater blessing. Now, while he was in prison, he was elevated, but he was forgotten by the chief butler in Genesis 40 and 23, as if his situation could have got worse. It did. In Genesis 40 and 23, he helped the chief butler, but the chief butler still forgot about him. In Genesis 40 and 23. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. So after Joseph interprets the dream of the pharaohs, the chief butler and chief baker while in prison, he asked the butler to remember him and help secure his release. But the butler forgot about him. This moment reveals the deep disappointment that Joseph must have felt. I mean, I can only imagine you doing all of this good work, and it seems like every good work you're doing, somebody is somewhere around the corner causing you some type of harm or some type of persecution. He had to trust God's promise through the interpretation, yet human forgetfulness and delay prolonged his suffering even longer. So it's not saying that the butler necessarily intentionally forgot, but it does let us know that the butler did forget. What we have to remember with this is delays don't necessarily mean denial. Just because God delays uh, certain events from happening in your life doesn't mean you're being denied. Sometimes, even after we do everything right, delays happen because of human weakness or because of circumstances. Joseph's deliverance was delayed, but it wasn't denied. And the reason it wasn't denied is because it came from God. We have to trust God's timing and not human timing. People may forget us. People may fail us. People may fail to act on our behalf, but God never forgets, and He never forgets His promises or His people. We have to have faith in our time of waiting. Joseph's faith didn't waver even when the butler forgot him. His trust in God remained faithful. In Genesis 41 and 14, the Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. Now, at this point of Joseph's life, he had been forgotten in prison for 2 years, about 2 years now. After helping to interpret the Pharaoh's dream, he was forgotten by the cupbearer and the baker. Suddenly, Pharaoh had a troubling dream and needed an interpreter. The cupbearer finally remembers Joseph. Joseph is called out of this dungeon to stand before the king. So now they had forgot him, but all of a sudden they remembered him, finally remembers him when the Pharaoh was in a bad place again. So let's break down this verse. The call came from the top, from Pharaoh himself, showing divine timing and favor. Joseph had no idea that this moment of elevation was about to come. He didn't know. God's timing often shows up suddenly after going through a long wait. A lot of times we get so caught up in we're going through these situations, these bad places, that sometimes God shows up right on time all the time. But sometimes we don't necessarily recognize it or be prepared for it because we're so caught up in all of the bad things that's going on. They brought him hastily out of the dungeon. Hastily means suddenly, with urgency. Joseph had been sitting in a dark, forgotten place, and yet his shift came. Not only right on time, but it came suddenly. Now, this divine pattern, the delay is not denial, and when it's your time, God accelerates the process. So, what did Joseph do? He shaved himself and he changed his clothes. It says raiment in the Bible, but that's what it means. Joseph prepared for his promotion. He took off the garments of a prisoner and dressed for the place. Now, what this symbolizes is transition and transformation in our life, shedding the identity of bondage and embracing our destiny. We can't be wearing the identity of bondage if we're walking into our destiny. We cannot be wearing the identity of bondage if we're walking into our destiny. Now, psychologically, letting go of what was to come and what God intended for his life. That's what it meant when he took off those clothes of prisoner and put on regular clothes. Then he came to Pharaoh. Now Joseph stood before the most powerful man in Egypt, but even greater, he stood in the purpose of God. Even though he was standing before the most powerful person on this earth, he still stood in the purpose of God. So, what this teaches us is that God can change our season in a moment. You can go from the pit to the palace, from forgotten to favor. Stay ready. Your name is being mentioned in rooms you are not yet in, but you have to stay ready. You have to be prepared for the next level. Joseph didn't go before Pharaoh in rags. He shaved and he changed. He prepared his presentation to go with his promotion. Even when you're not where you want to be, act in faith like you're on your way. Stop being in that place of bondage. I gotta dress like I'm in bondage. I gotta look like I'm in bondage. I gotta talk like I'm in bondage. I gotta act like I'm in bondage. Dress, dress for where you know you're on your way to. The dungeon was not the end. Every delay developed Joseph's character. Every situation he was going through developed his character. The test came before the throne. What we have to remember is when it's God's time, you'll be called suddenly and everything will move fast. But what you have to do is you have to stay in alignment. Faithfulness in the prison leads to favor in the palace. So let's look at some twist of this. The shaving was cutting off the old self. It's like a spiritual cleansing, a sanctification. The change in clothes was stepping into his new identity, which is what we're to do. Like when we put on Christ in Romans 13 and 14, we're stepping into our new identity. We can't be doing things the same way we used to do. We can't talk the same way we used to talk. We can't act the same way we used to act. So Joseph didn't just get out, he transformed himself on his way out. So here's a couple of reflection questions that I have for you guys. What prison season has prepared you for your Pharaoh's moment? What prison season has prepared you for your Pharaoh's moment? The next question is, what do you need to change internally and externally to step into your next purpose? What do you need in your life? Do you need to change internally and externally to step into your next purpose? In Genesis 41 and 41, Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. This was a divine promotion that he received. Now, in Genesis 45 and 7, he was reunited with his family. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth. So he was reunited with his family, but when he was reunited in his purpose. In Genesis 50 and 20, it says, but as for you, you thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good. And that's where we get that what the devil meant for bad, God will turn it for the good. That's where that comes from. Joseph was being betrayed. He was sold into slavery. He was falsely accused and imprisoned. Finally, it's revealed the bigger picture to his brother. They began to see the bigger picture. They began to see that To them, they was doing things out of jealousy and envy and hatred and anger, when in fact they was doing exactly what God needed them to do to get Joseph to the place he needed to go. That kind of coincides with, to a lot of people, Judas looked like he just this horrible person because he sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, when Judas actually helped Jesus to get to the place that he needed to do to serve out his greater purpose. So a lot of times what looks evil around us or what looks bad around us is actually moving us into our greater purpose. Now, Joseph understand that God's hands was orchestrating everything, even the evil intentions of others, to fulfill a divine purpose in his life. Joseph understood that. And what we have to remember with this is God's providence is greater than human plans. What was meant for harm, his brother's jealousy and betrayal, God used it for the good. We have to remember that, or reflect on the fact that God has a purpose for your pain. Joseph's suffering preserved the nation of Israel through famine by placing him in Egypt's leadership. Can you imagine what would have happened to Israel had Joseph not been placed in a position of leadership? Trust in God's plan, even when things seem broken or unfair. God can use every situation to accomplish His will. He can use every situation to accomplish His will. You just have to trust God's plan. So here's a couple of things to apply to your everyday life. When you face trials or betrayal, remember God can turn what others intended for evil into blessings. Embrace the ideas that your struggles can have a divine purpose beyond what you can see. Don't get so caught up in that pity party. Don't get so caught up in, I can't believe this is happening to me, or God, why did this happen to me? Look at the divine purpose of that. So just like Joseph, we can hold on to faith that God is working behind the scenes, guiding us for His glory and the good of others. So now this statement by Joseph to his brothers in Genesis 50 and 20, that statement that he made to his brother, that was a declaration of grace and perspective. Though his brothers intended harm by selling him into slavery, Joseph sees beyond their evil intention, because God's plan is always greater than our situation. Joseph chose to forgive, not to harbor onto that bitterness like his brothers held towards him. He chose not to hold on to that, but to forgive those who wronged him. This shows God's sovereignty in our life. No matter the evil others plan, God can use it for a greater good. This also brings about redemption. Pain and betrayal don't have the final say. God can redeem circumstances for our blessing. What we have to remember is when you face betrayal or harm, we have to remember Joseph's example. We have to forgive and trust God's ability to bring good out of any bad situation we're going through. We have to remember that our past hardships that we've dealt with, the insecurities, can become part of a larger story of redemption and purpose. Holding on to resentment blinds you to God's transformative power. Choose faith over bitterness. Choose faith over bitterness. So what we're going to do at this time is we get ready to come to the end of this segment. And I hope that this has been a blessing to everybody. I hope everybody has gotten uh, an understanding of how we can come out of any situation that the enemy put us in. We just have to allow and trust the process, trust God through the process, but we can come out of any situation. So I hope this has really helped your Monday, helped you be motivated of there's more. to your situation than what you could see. But what we're gonna do at this time, we're gonna look at a couple of life principles, because that's the whole purpose of these biblical stories that we're using, is to help prepare us for how to apply these biblical principles in our everyday life. So let's take a look at this. Your pit is not your final place. God used the low places to prepare you for leadership. The pit may seem like an end, but it is actually a beginning to your destiny. A lot of times, some of our greatest ministry, some of our greatest testimonies, some of our greatest sermons have come from being in a place that seemed like it was the end. If we trust the process, we'll realize that the process comes before the promotion. God doesn't elevate people who aren't ready. Joseph's training ground was in obscurity, but his character qualified him for visibility. He had to go through the process to be prepared for his promotion. Many times our pain has purpose. Joseph didn't let pain define him. He let God refine him. What's meant for harm becomes holy in God's hand. Don't get caught up in your pity party. Let God use that moment, that dark place, let him use that to refine you. Favor follows the faithful. Joseph's consistency is righteousness. Joseph's consistency in righteousness drew the favor of God even in dark places. Faithfulness shines in the furnace of being tested. So your greatest promotion may be wrapped in your deepest pain, but what you have to do is you have to stay faithful. In the pit, God is preparing a platform for your purpose, but you have to stay faithful in the pit. So a reflective moment that we have is, what pit experience have you survived that God is using for your purpose? And that's a question I want you to ask yourself and answer. What pit experience have you survived that God is using for your purpose? And what you have to declare when you're going through that moment, what you have to declare is, God, even when I don't understand, I trust your process. You're turning it for my good. I trust that. Even when you don't fully understand it, you just have to trust that God is turning it for your good. So even though Joseph wasn't a prophet by title, he was a dreamer with divine direction. And sometimes that's all God needs to turn your pit into purpose. Sometimes the vision God gives you will offend people. People will not like what you say. People will not like you, especially those still struggling with their identity or their insecurity. But Joseph's dream wasn't a dream of pride. It was a dream of prophecy. It was a dream of revelation. But those who was not ready to see his calling, just as for many of us today, many of them don't want to see our calling. They may mistake that clarity for being arrogant. So his brothers took it that he was being arrogant, but what Joseph was actually doing was preparing himself for his calling. So that is all we have for Don't Worry, God's Got Monday. I hope that this has motivated you to go a little further in the week. I hope this has helped you to see how to, even though in the midst of your pit, you're being prepared for your purpose. Just trust God through the process. So I hope this story has been inspiring to you. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at Pastor D. Bailey 72029 at gmail.com if you have any questions or comment. While you are here, be sure to become one of our members so that you can receive our Bible with the Twist t-shirt to support this ministry that is going on, that is going to be helping people that are in a dark place how to come out and how to come out safely and securely. So until tomorrow, God bless you and may He keep you in His perfect will. God bless you.